Hello and welcome back to the Edge of the Box podcast, a podcast by WhoScored.com. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, here with Jonathan Wilson and George Elek to preview this week's Premier League action, as we always do on this podcast. How are we both, chaps?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Yeah. I was over in Dublin earlier in the week doing a couple of live shows, so I'm slightly sleep deprived, but apart from that, okay.
You have my sympathies, as I'm exactly the same. And I went to Dublin 2 weeks ago, and I'm probably still recovering from that.
What a place.
Jaunt as well. George, are you well?
Yeah, mate, I'm great. Feel great. I've had some good sleep. Can't complain.
Let's look then at Tottenham against Liverpool, probably the biggest game of this week, I would say. And Jonathan, Tottenham's defence in general over the years, they've had a really poor record against Liverpool. We heavily praised Romero last week, and then Spurs conceded 2 goals, and he was kind of involved in those goals against Arsenal. Would you be concerned if you're a Tottenham fan up against this Liverpool attack that does feel like it's thriving a little bit at the moment?
I mean, I think both teams have got defensive issues. I think where Postecoglou's been really good has been, certainly the Bournemouth game away, the Manchester United game at home. When Tottenham came under defensive pressure, he made changes that blocked it up. So I suspect it's an issue of just getting it settled down. But they've only kept 2 clean sheets so far this season, but that is one more than Liverpool. So yeah, it's a concern, but I think that's probably the only thing you'd be worried about at Tottenham at the minute. I think the rest of the team is working far better than you'd expect. But yeah, Romero is one of those players who, in certain situations, he's the perfect defender. He's so aggressive, he's so front foot, but there are times when that leads him into rashness. I think the penalty. It's not much you can do about that.
No.
The own goal, I'm not sure his positioning is great. I think maybe he should be a bit closer to charging the shot down. I think maybe his body shape is it's the wrong way. If he's body pointing the other way, the ball would have deflected out. So it's slightly unfortunate, but yeah, I think Romero, there's always a risk there, but you accept that because of the aggression he gives you.
An aggressive defence against this Liverpool attack, George, probably not the way forward.
I don't know. They've obviously got so much individual quality there, but I think when you look at the way that Spurs dealt with Arsenal's threats last weekend, I think they, in terms of 1v1 defending, there were areas where I thought Tottenham came out on top for the most part in their duels. Even though Liverpool have made a very good start to the season in terms of their results, I don't think we've necessarily seen, apart from Mo Salah, who's got 3 goals and 4 assists, and Szoboszlai's obviously had a brilliant start in midfield. I'm not convinced that we've seen them hit top gear yet, which is going to be a good thing for Liverpool. Salah's started the season well, but beyond that, we're still seeing a lot of rotation elsewhere. Darwin is clearly the one who, he looks kind of well set now to have that second season, as we were told he would do, given what happened previously in his career. He reminds me so much of kind of prime, or just before prime, Cavani, in terms of just being that physical specimen up front who has an incredible knack of missing easy opportunities and yet scoring.
Misses a lot.
But the goals he scores, he's an absolute quandary of a footballer in terms of just not really making any sense. You look at the 3 Premier League goals he scored this season, all of them unbelievable finishes. And actually, despite the sitters that he's missed, he scored 3 goals from an expected 2.6. So he's overperforming his XG despite missing sitters because the goals he's scoring are so good. I think he's clearly a player who, if Jurgen Klopp is able to it felt like last season, effectively, because they were struggling, when Darwin was playing and not playing well, it was a massive detriment to Liverpool to the extent that Klopp just couldn't really trust him. Whereas now, given they look like a more cohesive unit, you kind of think Klopp is able to take more of a risk and play Darwin more, knowing that if Darwin does miss chances, they aren't going to be the only chances they create, and they're going to have more opportunities to win games. Because I do think in Nunez, you've got a player there who, if you're able to kind of, if you're happy to hurt for a period of time, if you're happy to accept he's going to miss chances, like as was the case with Cavani, who scored an unbelievable amount of goals over the course of his career, missing plenty of decent opportunities, because he's so good, because his movement is so good, because he just has that knack of getting into goal scoring positions basically all around the box and outside too. In time, as he gets acclimatized to playing with the players around him, as his confidence grows, he could score a ridiculous amount of goals. Like if there is a player in the Premier League who could feasibly challenge Erling Haaland in a poor season for Haaland, it's got to be Nunez, given his skill set.
Well, the Who Scored stats buffs have been investigating Jonathan, and Nunez has actually registered 6 assists as well in his time for Liverpool, and all of those assists have been for Mohamed Salah. Over the same period, Salah has assisted 2 Nunez goals. So that's 8 combined, and that's the most for Liverpool since the start of last season. Is that a combination you've noticed when watching Liverpool? Can't say it's something I've picked up on, actually, which probably doesn't say much for my watching ability of football.
I mean, 8 goals isn't that many, I guess, but I mean, it makes sense that he lays the ball off. Salah's going to be or possibly Luis Diaz on the other side are going to be the players running onto it. But I sort of think it's not really about necessarily one or the other. I looked at the stats, and last season, I mean, this season the stats are almost identical. So let's leave this season out of it. It's obviously a small sample size. Last season, when Nunez and Salah played together, Liverpool picked up 1.75 points per game. When they didn't play together, it was 1.71. So it made very little difference. When Salah and Jota played together last season, they picked up 1.93, and when they didn't, it was 1.66. So that would suggest that Jota is the better partner, in a wider combination. But I think sort of that's a slightly simplistic way of looking at it anyway, that what Nunez gives you is a sort of target man style player. I think that type of player is becoming increasingly important when opponents press you. How do you get around the press? Well, an easy way to do it is just play over the top. And clearly, if that's what you're doing, Nunez is more suited than Jota. But there will be games when having that player who drops deep, comes into midfield, and you want players going beyond him, is what you need and what you want. So I would suspect unless one of them suddenly hits a really sort of golden run of form, I would suspect it'll continue to be horses for courses. And I think one of the strengths Liverpool have is that they do have such a range of options up front. You can play Nunez on the left if you want to. If you want to play Jota as well and have Nunez coming in at the back post, that's also where you can do it. Or you can have Luis Diaz and his dribbling ability. So there's loads of options there. And I think it is that flexibility, that depth, which makes Liverpool's forward line look so exciting, so potent at the moment.
Yeah, now options in midfield as well, George, something that they didn't really have across the entirety of last season. Should Klopp be bringing Endo in for this one? If he did, it would probably be at the expense of Curtis Jones, because McAllister and God, I knew I was going to get that wrong this morning. Szoboszlai are feeling like their mainstays in that Liverpool midfield now. But Curtis Jones has been a really important player for Liverpool, probably since around April, and actually their unbeaten run, it coincided with Jones coming in the team. So if Endo's ever going to get a game, maybe it won't be at Jones's expense.
Probably not. And I think if you bring Endo in, you basically have to shift the way that midfield's going to work, where for the most part this season, against West Ham in their last game, it's basically, it's fairly fluid. It's not as rigid a 4-3-3 as we're used to seeing, but McAllister is the centre of the three with Jones kind of off the left, but given license to come inside. If you bring Endo in, then you're going to have to change the dynamic of that entirely, where Endo would have to sit and basically play the Fabinho role with McAllister being shifted outside. And I think McAllister was superb against West Ham. He's one of those players who, for the most part, will keep it simple, and then you'll see the assist where he takes a chance at the optimum time. Isn't one of those players who is consistently trying to spring play balls over the top of the defence. But when he does, he's got the quality to execute it while still having the kind of positional sense in order to play that linchpin role. With Endo, he's very much a holding midfielder. He's someone who will not provide the creativity from deep, but will certainly win the ball back and retain possession. But in Curtis Jones, I still I think he's one of those players where, because of the way that football is covered now on social media, Liverpool were not having a particularly good time of things. Curtis Jones was a young English player being brought into the side at that time, and suddenly everyone decided that he was some kind of a joke figure for a time. And I don't understand it. I think Curtis Jones is one of the most exciting young English players currently. I think he proved that in the summer in the under-21s, where he was probably England's best player on their way to victory. He played at right back in the Carabao Cup game against Leicester last night. He's incredibly versatile. His range of, his skill set, both in possession and out of possession, is massive. Like, he's an aggressive presser. He's got such quality on the board in tight spaces. He's a really tidy passer. he's a brilliant player. Like, he's someone who we should be getting incredibly excited about, and he's been massive for Liverpool this season. So I'd be pretty surprised. I mean, if Jurgen Klopp does change it and bring Endo in and kind of revert back to the kind of shape, or that more rigid 4-3-3 with McAllister and Szoboszlai either side, I think that would be a massive sign of respect from Klopp to Ange Postecoglou and what he's doing with Spurs, because there would be an acceptance there that they need to stop Tottenham's quality in possession. But I think it would be harsh on Jones. But maybe the fact that he started on Wednesday night and started out of position as well might suggest that he is going to be taken out.
Well, if you look at the graphic, he's actually integral to Liverpool. Their average goal difference goes up and their average 0.1 goes up massively as well. And like I said before, their unbeaten run has coincided with Curtis Jones coming into that midfield. So it will be interesting to see what Klopp does in this game away at Tottenham. Probably the toughest game they've had since Newcastle away, if memory serves me correctly, which they outstandingly won with 10 men that day. Let's talk a little bit about Tottenham then, Jonathan. Let's talk about James Maddison. Probably the form player in the Premier League right now, James Maddison. Certainly the WhoScored ratings would point in that direction. He literally hasn't taken any time to settle into that Tottenham Hotspur way and Postecoglou's way as well. He's already a really key player for them, probably their most important player now. Harry Kane's gone. Yeah,
he's had an amazing start to the season, and I think it's a real, if McAllister does play at the back of Liverpool midfield, it's a real test of his defensive quality. I mean, if he can handle Maddison at the minute, he can pretty much handle anything. Yeah, as to who'll play, I think that point about why would you play Curtis Jones at right back against Leicester if you plan to use him at the weekend? It seems a very strange thing. But equally, bringing in Endo when he's only had one league start, I think he's only played 93 minutes of league football, that would also seem a risk. So I'm a little bit unclear as to what the thinking is there.
Trent midfield, Jones at right back.
Well, yeah, possibly. Yeah,
they might be working on that for the future patterns of play.
But Maddison's been exceptional. What I think I hadn't quite appreciated was how tactically intelligent he is. So I think that game at Bournemouth, when he played, he came so deep to help Tottenham beat the Bournemouth press. I thought he was exceptional in that game. But he's just so lively, and I think as well you see his self-confidence that he made that mistake, got caught in possession by the Arsenal press last Sunday, and then a couple of minutes later he's creating the equaliser, that turn on the left wing. He doesn't seem fazed by anything. He seems very comfortable at that level. He's gone from being the big fish at Leicester to being one of many fish at Tottenham. And that can be difficult for players. I think you saw Grealish struggle slightly with that when he went to City. But he's adapted exceptionally well. And that midfield, the balance of that midfield with Basuma and Sarr, I think looks really nice. I think there still needs to be a slight tweak there, because I think they do at times leave the defence slightly exposed, and that's one of the few issues Tottenham have had this season. But I think he is the obvious creative spark there.
The thing I like about Maddison, George, is you can watch the game of football and you obviously notice him because he's involved in everything. So he passes the eye test, but also it's his productivity. Record goals and assists, even at Leicester last season in a poor team. He's always involved. He's always scoring goals. He's always getting assists. Very rarely there's a game where he doesn't score or assist. So he kind of passes both tests, if that makes sense.
And I think crucially, and this is important to a lot of creative players, like his head never drops. If you, even in the Arsenal game, I can't remember who it was who nicked the ball off him, but when he was caught in possession and nearly gave away the goal, straight away he was back on the ball and demanding it and coming deep and looking to play those passes. Like there are so many players with, well, there aren't so many players, but there are a lot of players with those creative skill sets who are so streaky in terms of their form, because when they are creating, they're playing well. Even last season, it seemed to kind of almost rankle with Leicester fans how during a campaign where Leicester was so poor, Maddison kind of remained pretty chipper about things and didn't really embody a player whose Premier League status was in jeopardy, and that was probably because he knew it wasn't going to be in time. Like he's a phenomenal talent, and I think his ability, as we're seeing at Tottenham now, to both drop deep and recycle the ball and be that player who can come in and just help the team move up the pitch in possession, whilst also being a player who can carry it, who can be their most creative force in the final third, a huge goal threat. He's one of those players who's now just excelling, really playing in a system where he is the main man, playing under a manager who's obviously got experience and a track record of nurturing the kind of talent that Maddison is and just kind of breathing a bit of freedom into them. So yeah, he looks to be relishing it now. He looked to, I think he was pretty delighted to have done his mate Bukayo after Saka copied his celebration twice, and then obviously he did him on the left hand side for the equaliser. But yeah, he's an absolute joy to watch, and I'm sure if Tottenham are going to maintain this level of form under Postecoglou, then Maddison is going to be the key player.
He's a real leader as well. I think he's already part of Tottenham's leadership group.
And it says a lot that he took the fact that he took Kane's. I mean, I genuinely think the narrative around squad numbers and kits and the rest of it is fairly tiresome. But I think when Harry Kane is probably one of the most iconic one club players until he obviously had loans before, but in terms of embodying an era at a club, and he walks out the door and Maddison's immediately taking his squad number. That to me suggests that he's a player who wants to be the main man, who wants to be part of the leadership group, who wants to be the poster boy for this new post-Kane era at Spurs, and he started that campaign incredibly well.
How dare you lay into squad number enthusiasts? We all know that when the squad numbers are announced at the start of the season, that's one of the peak days of the summer before the football starts. Always exciting.
Absolute evidence of boredom, that, isn't it? And everyone goes wild over squad numbers in July.
I have always been obsessed with squad numbers for some reason. It says a lot about
me too. I will never wear 4.
I thought you were being sarcastic. I think I wasn't expecting a serious point to be made off the back of it.
I thought he was going to be an ally, I have to say.
But personally, I always wore 8. And then somebody better came to the club, demanded number 8. So I grudgingly took the number 16, and I've stuck with 16 since. I'm very happy with 16. But not 4.
Favorite number as well.
JW16.
Yeah, I like 16. I don't know what.
It's interesting though that it's interesting that you went from 8 to 16 because it was double, but then 4, which is the first in the season, you're like allergic to.
I've only won 4 twice, scored 9 goals both times. Never do it again. And also Paul Bracewell wore 4, and he kind of betrayed Sunderland. So
Paul Bracewell.
Who's Sunderland's number 16?
I actually don't know. I mean, it's Roy Keane's number, obviously. Roy Keane, who shares a birthday with my dad. Different years, but
there's no number 16. Jonathan, they're keeping it for you.
They've retired
I'm so touched by that.
they've retired it for Dr. Jonathan Wilson.
Amazing.
Lovely stuff. Oh, well done, Jonathan. Well, not well done to you, George. Not acceptable to not enjoy squad numbers.
That's right.
Right.
Football clothes.
I mean, if you don't enjoy squad numbers, you're probably not going to enjoy something in this combined 11, I would say. Let's just quickly rattle through it. We've got, I presume Trent can't be in it because he's injured. So we've got Vicario in goal, Pedro Porro at right back, Romero, who we cursed last week, Van Dijk and Robertson. Bissouma at the base of the midfield with Szoboszlai and Maddison in front. That's a very nice midfield. And then the front 3 is Salah, Son, and of course, Solomon, exactly who I was expecting to see on the left wing for this combined 11. It was a nice 11 until we got to the left flank.
I think it's a bit over-attacking in midfield. I'd like somebody a bit more conservative in midfield.
I'm not sure where you get that player from, in all honesty, across both teams. Probably Bentancur if he was fit, but they're not really.
No, but I think you'd have. I'd keep Sarvin alongside Bissouma probably. And then you've got to pick between Szoboszlai and Maddison.
Probably you could put Szoboszlai into the front 3 or Maddison into the front 3, arguably, as well, instead of Solomon. But the WhoScored guys are trying to keep it to where players have played. Maddison is the top-rated player in the Premier League at the moment, according to WhoScored. So everything we've just raved about him is automatically true because he is the top player, according to the algorithm. Let's get a score prediction from you both then. George, I'll come to you first.
I mean, they've got to be goals, haven't there? Let's go for another 2-2 draw.
Yeah, served me well, the 2-2 last week. I'll go for 1-1. Jonathan?
Yeah, I had 1-1 down and I crossed it out and I've gone 2-1 Liverpool.
Okay, so we've all got something different, and that's what's needed at the moment, differentials, because we'll pop the league table up here and look at how we did last week, and I am absolutely running away like a train.
I've been sabotaged.
Hang on, whoever was doing it for me in between, what are they doing wrong if you're winning? Because I think I got 13 points the previous week.
What I am doing is, I think even if you were doing it every week, my score is sensational for this stage of the season. Been getting pretty much 2 or 3 bang on every week.
Also, the absolute shade from Jonathan to say whoever it is you got on for me.
I didn't even realise. I can't remember who is it we've got on instead of him.
Sam.
Oh, that's it. So,
Oh yeah. Oh, no, he's a nice lad.
I know that. So he's not very good at he's not very good at predictions, though,
It's
Jonathan.
much better than whoever you got doing mine. That was absolute sabotage.
It was your mate.
I know. He started predicting absolute wild scores.
I did question him. I did feel like he was on the sabotage for your predictions. There was some questionable things that he came up with. Got some excellent opinions on football, but his predictions were absolutely awful. So yeah. I remain top of the table, where I'm probably going to remain.
I think we should average this out for the ones we've actually done.
What do you mean?
I agree.
I think it should be points per game for the ones we actually predict.
I still don't understand.
So you look at the ones I've predicted, just me, and you work out what the points total is and how many games, and you divide that points total by that number of games, and that gives you a coefficient. You work out how many points you've got and how many games you've predicted, and you divide that number of points by the number of games, that gives you a coefficient. And whoever has the highest coefficient over the season... Remember in the COVID season when they stopped the leagues early and Wickham got promoted by coefficient?
Yes.
Actually, I seem to have talked out my own point there because Wickham getting promoted was a terrible thing. But yeah, points per game. That's the. I mean, given we couldn't even get Ben to keep a normal league table last season, like I see people interested in about 3 months.
Let's look at Villa v Brighton then, and I was feeling a lot better about this game until Villa entered the Carabao Cup and decided to get knocked out by Everton at home. And Villa have had quite a low-key good start to the season, George, I would say, winning 4 of 6, obviously losing at Liverpool and Newcastle, which there's no shame in that. So a good start. When you throw the cup games in as well, Villa seems to just be win one, lose one, win one, lose one. They can't seem to get any consistency across all competitions, so that means they'll beat Brighton at the weekend.
Yeah, but this is also why I think anyone who's followed Unai Emery's career probably assumed, like me, that the cup competitions would be central to this season and the league form may dip. But Villa have been magnificent.
Yeah, I've played a big part
so far, apart from that 5-1 opening day defeat against Newcastle. But we've seen a defeat in the first game in the Europa League, in the Conference League in Warsaw. Knocked out of the Carabao Cup, home to Everton on Wednesday night, which again, I didn't necessarily expect. You'd think that Emery would maybe prioritise these kind of competitions, given that his managerial career has been kind of based around winning those kind of trophies. But as you say, in the league, it's been much, much better. There was the 1-0 win over Chelsea last time where, Villa played pretty well. Like, there's no denying that the red card to Malo Gusto obviously played a massive part in that. And Emi Martinez made some massive saves, both at 0-0 and then from Ben Chilwell late on, which would have equalised the game. But Ollie Watkins took his goal well. Him being back in the goals has got to be a big plus for Villa. And Sanchez made a couple of massive saves as well, both at 0-0 and at 1-0 as well for Chelsea. So it wasn't like it was one-way traffic before that. But this is going to be, I think, a really big test for Villa in terms of you've been beaten 3-0 at Anfield already, been beaten by Newcastle. Yes, the win over Chelsea is big, but Chelsea's form going into that game was poor. So this is another opportunity to play a team who have genuine top 6 aspirations, who've also performed like a top 6 side already this season for Villa to kind of try and show, I guess, the rest of the league that they are capable of challenging again for those European spots.
Yeah, let's ask number 16, Jonathan Wilson, about Villa then. Villa's shots are up from 11.2 to 14.2 from last season to this season. But as a consequence, they've conceded more. They have been a little bit more open at the back. I say a little bit, quite a lot more open at the back. This isn't Emery's got this high line, and much of Villa's good away form last season under Emery, which propelled them to Europe, and the home form as well, was built on being very resolute in defence. This offside trap, but it all felt a bit tighter than it does right now. Villa's high line has been exposed, and you'd imagine if they play that way against Brighton will benefit from that.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And what we've seen from Pau Torres is exactly what we thought. That lovely on the ball, but doesn't like a ball in behind him, does he? He's not quick on the turn. And that got really exposed at Newcastle on the opening weekend. I mean, I had a bit of sympathy with him there that he was thrusted, obviously, before he was meant to be because of the injury to Mings. But whenever I saw him for Villarreal, that was always the thing I thought about him, that playing a high line with him is a massive risk. And I think that's why you've seen these wild fluctuations in Villa's form, that when they play against fast forwards and a good midfield who can feed that fast forward, they struggle. But when they can dominate the ball, well, it's really advantageous to have somebody who's that good on the ball.
Yeah.
And I think over his career, the thing that Emery's actually been really impressive at is being able to flip between playing on that high line and going to a low block. And even last season, there was that run of games, wasn't it, when Villa lost to, I might get the order wrong here, but they lost to Leicester, Arsenal and City in successive games. And I think let in 10 goals in those 3 games. I think it was, 4 at Leicester, 3 to City. I'd say 11 because it's 4 against Arsenal as well. So 11 goals in those games. And then he went much more cautious after that. I think the next 10 games, Villa let in some like 5 or 6 in total. And one of those games was the victory at Stamford Bridge last season, which was, I thought, a really good example of how to play with a low block and hit on the break. So it's whether he can do that in the games where he needs to here. Now, Brighton are the kind of team definitely away from home you'd want to do that. You saw how West Ham did that very successfully. Do you do that at home against them? But I think the thing with Brighton is and the reason why De Zerbi is so revered by other coaches, why even people like Guardiola are talking about learning from De Zerbi, is the fact that Brighton play in a way where they use your press against you. So the players looking to receive the ball don't move into space. They wait for the player who's going to press to move out the way. And that I think is a really hard thing for teams who are used to pressing to get their head around. And that game against Newcastle I thought was fascinating in that regard, that Newcastle clearly realised that the way Brighton like to play is give it to the centre-back. The centre-back gives it to Billy Gilmour. Billy Gilmour plays it wide, then they build from there. Yeah, the obligatory Billy Gilmour reference. And Newcastle did shut that down pretty well, which is why Newcastle, the first sort of 25 minutes, half hour of that game, were on top. And then Brighton started building through their fullbacks and worked out a way around it. And then the press that had been so successful for Newcastle in cutting down that avenue actually starts to count against them because they're pressing in the wrong areas. And that's where, very occasionally when you're at a game, you can see this. You can see the managers making the switches. You can see the tweaks happening. And that was one of those games where you could really see it. You could see that Newcastle had been outwitted by De Zerbi. I think you saw it a bit the game at Old Trafford as well for Brighton, where again, Manchester United playing that quite narrow diamond. The space is obviously on the flanks. So again, Brighton very quickly switched to, right, we're going to build up through the fullbacks. Tarek Lamptey had a great game that day. So I think it's a really difficult question. What if you're Villa at home against Brighton? I think, as I say, if it was an away game, I don't think you'd have any second thoughts. Play deep against them. At home, maybe it's a bit different. And that's the huge conundrum. I think that battle, the Emery versus De Zerbi battle, will be fascinating.
Yeah, and Jonathan will do no other podcasts where he's interrupted when he's making serious football points. Just getting that he's talked about Billy Gilmour. He won't do any other podcast where the presenter interrupts him mid-point. Do
you remember? Why would you remember this before you were born? The Royal Mail did a series of stamps featuring classic trains, and on every one they had a tiny little mouse, and it's kind of, you had to try and spot where the mouse was. I feel that Billy Gilmour is that mouse. And this podcast is those Royal Mail stamps of trains.
Great. I mean, if someone could quote that and make a poster. Picture of Jonathan Wilson and then that quote. That is, I don't remember it. You'll be surprised though. I don't know what year it was in. I don't know how old.
Oh, it's probably about 1982 or something.
You'll now see that the headline for this show is going to be Billy Gilmour is a mouse. Jonathan Wilson.
Yeah.
Oh, some of those headlines are unpleasantly provocative.
We talked about doing our predictions and how difficult that can be. If we were having to predict what Brighton's starting 11 was game by game, I don't think anyone would ever get a full house. He is not afraid to rotate at all, including the goalkeepers. Everyone goes on about the Arsenal goalkeepers, but De Zerbi's already doing that. Yeah,
he is. Yeah, and it is difficult to, I was pretty surprised to see how strong they went at Stamford Bridge on Wednesday night. Joao Pedro started, Ansu Fati started, Mitoma started. Obviously, Mitoma came off the bench to have the impact in the win over Bournemouth last time, where he came on at half-time. I think when, Roberto De Zerbi asks a lot physically from his players, like they press very aggressively. And naturally, I think when you ask for that much, in order to maintain levels of fitness, you have to rotate a fair bit. And also, they've got so many talented players. Like, we all go into the season knowing about, the 22 or odd good Brighton players who are proven, but it turns out they've normally got about 7 more up their sleeve who we've never heard of. They can bring in and immediately look like Premier League stars. Like they've got a brilliant base to rotate from. They've got, especially in their front line, they've got so many different kinds of options as well. There's versatility in their team as well, with like Pascal Gross seemingly being able to play any kind of midfield role that Roberto De Zerbi asked of him. So yeah, it is difficult to predict who will start and who will come in here. But yeah, looking at the Carabao Cup team, it probably suggests that those players I just mentioned may not be in from the start.
Yeah, one player that always starts when he's fit is Lewis Duncan. He's making more passes per game than any defender in the Premier League this season, which is an interesting start. Although he has had an injury recently, so he may not play against Villa. Hopefully Matoma doesn't play as well, because he's a sensational watch. I don't really want to see him line up at Villa Park at the weekend. Let's get some score. Oh, sorry, George. I
was just going to say, obviously people talk about it a lot, but the more I watch of him, the more I'd like to read his dissertation on dribbling.
So it's, I know somebody who's seen an extract of it.
Really?
And the bit he's seen. So yeah, he wore a GoPro to look at what opponents did when he was dribbling towards them. And this extract that my mate's seen, because people are used to people like running left leg, right leg, left leg, right leg, the standard way. when he first controls the ball, he'll take 2 steps with the same leg to off balance the defender. Now I have to say, since I heard this, I've watched him. I can't see him do that. But that apparently is what it says in the dissertation, that he takes a double step on one leg because everybody expects you to alternate.
Do you think the dissertation is like a moment where he's written that, hoping the defenders will read that, expecting him to do the double step, and he doesn't, and then they're like, "Well, I don't know what to do now."
Yeah. I mean, what deep cover that is to write a dissertation in Japanese at a Japanese university. On the off chance Premier League defenders start to read it, I mean that's taken it to another level.
I mean, hearing Dr. Jonathan Wilson talk about dissertations as well. This is what we've all come here for. Let's get some score predictions then. I'll go first this time. Go the same score as last season. Villa 2, Brighton 1. Jonathan?
1-1.
2-1 Brighton.
2-1 to Brighton. Again, a nice little mix. This is probably why there's a big separation in the league at the moment. Everyone's predicting completely different things, and I seem to be coming off well of that. Let's look at the fixtures then and do our general predictions for the rest of the game. So we've done Villa against Brighton. Bournemouth against Arsenal, George.
Bournemouth, Arsenal. I'm going to say 2-0 to Arsenal.
I'm going to go 3-0 to Arsenal, Jonathan.
2-1 to Arsenal.
Everton v Luton, Jonathan.
1-0 to Everton.
1-0.
2-1 to Everton. Manchester United v Palace. They won in midweek against them, didn't they?
Weird game midweek.
Teams, yeah. I will say 2-1 again to Manchester United, George.
2-0 United.
2-0 United.
Newcastle against Burnley, George.
Newcastle 2, Burnley 0.
Snap, 2-0 Newcastle.
I might as well throw in 2-0 to Newcastle as well then. This is how you stay top.
No, I think you should go first, to be honest.
But every time?
Yeah.
I like to mix it up.
I think whoever's ahead should go first, and then that means that we can ensure they don't employ that tactic.
Or maybe we should have to write them down first, like on Countdown, and you can show people what you've written down.
Show you working. Okay, yeah. We'll inquire about that. Can you change the rules mid-season?
That means we'd have to do actual preparation, Jonathan. That would be a disaster.
Yeah, I like them to have all my...
I mean, I put this through my own personal algorithm, but it's taken years to
West Ham v Sheffield United, I'll go first for this one then, and I will say 3-0 to West Ham, Jonathan.
2-0 to West Ham.
1-0.
Wolves v Man City, Jonathan.
2-0 to City.
I'll go 4-0 to City, George.
Yeah, 4-1 City.
Nottingham Forest against Brentford, George. You go first this time.
2-0 Forest. A bit worried about Brentford at the moment.
2-0 to Forest. Interesting. I will go 1-1. Jonathan?
1-0 to Forest.
And then the Monday Night Football, London Derby, Fulham v Chelsea.
1-0 to Chelsea.
Oof, 1-0 to Chelsea. The underdog coming out on top in Jonathan's mind, George.
I mean, how often am I going to keep saying Chelsea are going to turn it around? I'm a slave to the data. 2-0 Chelsea. 2-1
to Fulham for me in the West London derby. We are going to look a little bit at Fulham now. Doing okay, decent start for Fulham. Obviously lost a big player. Jimenez has come in to replace Mitrovic essentially, and has not got off to a flying start. And then I quite like Vinicius actually, but is he a main number 9 for a Premier League team? Not sure. Does that departure of Mitrovic now mean that Palhinha, who's one of my favourite players, Jonathan, is probably one of the most important players to any team in the league, arguably the most important to any team?
Yeah, but I think that was true before Mitrovic left. I think he's
very good.
Yeah, the absolute key to them. And I also think he's sort of perfect for Fulham. He gives them exactly what they need. Whether that ball winning capacity is as valuable at a club that dominates possession more, I'm not quite as convinced by. I think it may, I know maybe it would work, but I think it may be that he's at the club was absolutely perfect for him. And I know there was that ludicrous Marco Silva saying, "Oh, he's always been committed to Fulham." Did you miss a bit where he was holding up a Bayern shirt in Munich, signing a contract? I mean, that would suggest he wasn't that committed, but he seems to have settled back down, and I think it's an understandable thing, right? Bayern Munich come in and you're at Fulham, you pursue that as far as you can, and it's not that Fulham. I suppose Fulham did stop it, but he doesn't seem to harbour any ill will to them. And the fact he signed a new contract, you assume that's like Caicedo. It's okay, you can go, but we're going to get proper money for you. So whether he goes in January, whether it's the end of the season, you will find out. But I think he's absolutely critical to how Fulham play.
Yeah, when he didn't play last season, they got taken apart a few times. I know they had that spell where Mitrovic was missing, but anytime Palhinha wasn't there, the midfield just didn't essentially run properly, and they've conceded a lot of goals. And if you look at Fulham's top 10 tacklers since the start of last season, Palhinha's way out on top with 164. The nearest midfielder to him is Harrison Reed with 52, which I know that they're different types of players, but Palhinha, if you actually watch Fulham play, the amount of tackles he makes and the way he gets around the pitch, he's a really good watch, and he is one of the best defensive midfielders, I think, in the Premier League. What should Fulham's ambitions be this season, George? They were doing really well last season. They were looking on for Europe at one point. Still got a top half finish, I think, but it's going to be a lot harder this time round to get top half. It just tells you how well they did last season.
I'd be amazed if they're challenging for the top half, personally. I know they've started the season with an okay points tally in terms of 8 points from 6, and given how much the 3 promoted teams from last season out of the Championship have struggled, it already feels like most of those sides are in that kind of clutch of teams in terms of Forest and Fulham, unless there's a massive turnaround in fortunes of the likes of Burnley. Probably aren't going to have too much to worry about behind them. But I think there's been a pretty big drop-off in terms of Fulham so far this campaign. Obviously, the striker situation is a massive issue. Mitrovic, I think any team who loses a striker who's scored that many goals and is that pivotal you're going to struggle to replace him. But in Mitrovic, they've got a player whose skill set is just vastly different to anybody else, really. And what Marco Silva did that was so impressive was he managed just to basically build a team around getting the ball onto Mitro's head in the 6-yard box. The addition of Harry Wilson was very clever in doing that. Willian last season as well. But without him, they're just a shadow of the team that they were. I think the signing of Raul Jimenez didn't make any sense, given that you were effectively buying a player based on quality that we'd seen before a career-changing injury. And he just quite obviously hasn't been the same player since that injury. Obviously no fault of his own, but to anticipate that Raul Jimenez was going to come in and replace Mitrovic was fairly naive, and just to bring in one striker effectively to replace him didn't really make any sense. Now they're left with 2 players leading the line. When you look at, I think Jimenez's total XG this season so far has been 0.6. His highest XG chance has been 0.12, which, given how many minutes he's played leading the line for a Premier League team, is woeful numbers. And in Vinicius, you've got a player who I don't think anybody at the moment necessarily thinks, if he was up to the task, I think he'd have played way more minutes than we've seen already this season. So this is what they've got until January. They're going to have to, find a way to make it work. But that is the clear issue at the moment. And it feels likely that they're going to be relying on the likes of, Bobby De Cordova-Reid and other players, for their goal output, because they've lost a glut of goals and don't have anyone of the similar skill set to be able to replace them. So, I'd be amazed if they are challenging for. Just looking now, they haven't got a single player who scored more than a single goal. It's Pereira, Reid, Vinicius, Palhinha, and Ream who've scored their 5 goals this season. And the XG numbers don't make particularly pretty reading either as a team, where they They've conceded over 10 next year against and conceded just 7 goals. So they're kind of overperforming in that extent. And they've conceded the third fewest expected goals from open play with 3.37, having scored 3 goals. So worrying signs. But as I say, given how poor the rest of the league are, that there's not too much jeopardy, I don't think, at this stage.
Yeah, problems at the top end, Jonathan. But as George just alluded to, the goalkeeper is very good, and he's going to be important if they are to avoid being in a relegation scrap.
Yeah, I think they will be in a relegation scrap, though. And I also wonder at what point. I mean, Marco Silva, I think, has been twice approached by Saudi clubs. At what point does he decide, you know what, this is going nowhere, I might jump ship here? And then I think they are in a lot of bother. I think the way they fell off last season towards the end, I think that's always a worrying sign. The 3 promoted clubs have started so poorly that you think maybe there's a bit of a free pass this season. I think Forest are much improved from last season as well.
Yeah, they're good. I
know it's only 7 points from 6 games, but I think they've played 4 away games already, all against what are Chelsea these days. But
that's
notionally big 6 teams. They've played United away, they've played City away, and they played Arsenal away and Chelsea. So I'd be surprised if Forest are in serious danger. But I think Fulham are one of those who, say Burnley do put a run together, which I think is possible. Fulham, I'd say, are in bother.
Yeah, the 3 promoted sides all stayed up relatively comfortably in the end last season. Georgia, Fulham, the most vulnerable of those 3, would you say? Because Bournemouth are a funny one at the moment. I can't really work them out, but are Fulham the most vulnerable of the 3, would you say?
And I think Bournemouth have to be in that conversation as well. Given they're on 3 points from 6 games and aren't really clear of those 3 that we mentioned before, I think Bournemouth have to, at this stage, be the team you think, if any team in the whole Premier League is going to get sucked into this. I mean, it's incredibly early days. It's the end of September, but it's just very rare to have 3 teams on 1 point at this stage, and you're not really seeing where those points are going to come from. So, yeah, as I say, I think Fulham look like, even though there'll be a drop-off, they should be fine. With Bournemouth, Areola has to start getting more out of his players, although it does feel like they've had a particularly hard start to the season, having already faced some decent sides, including Chelsea, although what are Chelsea at the moment?
Chelsea got enough to stay up, George?
Yes. It's been interesting to see the discourse in the last week or so where everyone has basically twigged about Chelsea being one of the biggest data outliers we've basically ever seen in the Premier League at this stage, where the underlying numbers are phenomenally good and the performances and the results are very poor. Like, part of that will be down to game state, because they are basically spending no time in games ahead, which means that if you're always chasing a game, you're always level. It's obviously going to bolster your numbers, because naturally you're going to have more, you're going to carry more attacking threat when you're behind. For Nicholas Jackson, it feels like a case where, like, when rather than if, in my view, like, he's getting into good opportunities consistently. He hasn't been prolific in the past, but he's clearly a much better finisher than we're seeing. He scored in the win against Brighton in midweek. I thought he did a little wrong in that one-on-one with Martinez against Villa. It was just a brilliant save from Martinez with his outstretched hand. With Chelsea, I think it's a matter of time until they click. But I've been saying that for just over a year now.
The only thing I'd say, and I fundamentally, that's clearly true, but the only thing I do wonder is whether the inexperience of this Chelsea side just slightly undermines the data, that the reason they're missing so many chances is they're so young and so lacking in confidence. And when you don't have the experience there, how easy is it to get the confidence back? So that I think is where maybe we wouldn't necessarily expect a major regression to the mean there, that maybe the mean is slightly lower than the data suggests, just because of the youth and experience of the side and how badly it's been put together. But I mean, in terms of Chelsea getting relegated, we were actually talking about this in the press room before the Chelsea.
Here he is.
Here we go.
Before the Chelsea-Liverpool game, opening weekend of the season, there was a few of us in the press room saying, like, realistically, when could Chelsea be relegated? And I think it's just, I'm not saying it's going to happen at all, but I think it's just about conceivable that next season, possibly the season after, obviously what would have to happen, they don't get into Europe, mass panic about the FFP situation. They've run out of academy players to sell. They've got to sell Reece James and Levi Colwill because they're the only 2 academy players left. And suddenly they have to have this fire sale where they get rid of Caicedo or Fernandes. And it's not merely a young squad, but it's a young squad where half of the good players have to be sold just to keep afloat. And then I think in it is just about possible next season or the year after they actually could be in proper danger.
But is there not not a concern's the wrong word, but like given the climate of world football right now, it feels like there's a massive get out opportunity for poorly run elite clubs where you've got basically Saudi Arabia willing to pay ridiculous money for Deadwood, which didn't exist in the past. So it feels like clubs like Chelsea are now able just to sit down in June and be like, right, yeah, that was bad. Okay, let's just move on. And
it obviously helps when the Saudi PIF who own 4 of those clubs own up to, but we're told not more, 5% of Clearlake.
Yeah,
I mean, that is true.
Jail card.
I mean, what a podcast. Team in Focus Fulham ended talking about Chelsea. Absolutely monumental. What a show! But thank you very much for your.
Story of Fulham's, that
is very Fulhamish. I would.
Jimenez is it's just really sad what's happened. I mean, he hasn't scored a league goal since March 2022, and given how good he was before the injury, it's it's really sad that that's happened because he was such a good player to watch.
I mean, it would be very Chelsea for him to score then. At the moment,
that's true. That is true. Yeah,
look out for that one on the Monday Night Football. Thanks very much to you both for joining me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you both as always. Do subscribe to the podcast with your post notifications on if you're enjoying it, and subscribe wherever you are getting your podcasts. Give it a like as well, and give us a nice review if you're on a platform that enables you to leave nice reviews. We'll be back next week to look back over our predictions and talk about the upcoming Premier League game week, and looking forward to it already. And Jonathan, I don't think you'll be with us next week, but you'll be maybe prepping Sam
with you in spirit.
Yes. Prep Sam with your predictions. You'll be sure to tune in as well. But yeah, that does us. Tell all your friends and family about the pod, and have a good weekend.